This election cycle is the first time that artificial intelligence has really played a role. So, what does that mean for the way we conduct elections in this country?
There are some other aspects of elections that AI will be or has already started to impact, where I think there could be some benefits, specifically in the area of election administration and cybersecurity.
On this episode, we sit down with an AI and election policy expert to talk about some of the opportunities and challenges presented by this new technology. You're listening to Defending Ideas. Defending Ideas is a weekly podcast produced by Sutherland Institute. On this show, we are committed to renewing the principles of common sense conservatism, making you a better champion of sound ideas. Welcome back to another episode of Defending Ideas. I'm your host, Nic Dunn, and this week we're talking about election policy again, but with an interesting twist. We're going to bring in the topic of artificial intelligence. And to have that discussion, joining us in our virtual studio is Chris McIsaac. He's a resident fellow in governance at R Street Institute, which is a Washington, D.C. based think tank. Chris, welcome to Defending Ideas.
Thank you, Nick, for having me.
Chris, I'm excited to talk to you about this because I think for a lot of folks out there, AI is kind of a new thing. I mean, it's obviously a new and emerging technology, but I want to kind of ask you just generally how we should be thinking about this. And obviously, we've all seen Terminator or other sci-fi movies about machines kind of running amok. So there's, of course, this common theme in pop culture about a threat of artificial intelligence. But we've also, in recent months or recent years, used some of these tools. For example, ChatGPT is a big one that's come on the scene recently. There are now a slew of artificial intelligence resources being developed by many tech companies, and we've seen the power and the excitement of using those tools to do cool new things. So I want to just, get your thoughts generally. How do you think about the issue of artificial intelligence? And then, of course, I want to talk about it in the context of elections, but what's your gut? Should we be worried? Should we be excited? A little bit of both.
Well, first off, thanks so much for the opportunity to participate in the conversation today. I think, for me, I'm excited about the emergence of artificial intelligence generally. I think it's going to create amazing opportunities across many different aspects of the economy. It's going to disrupt industries for sure. And there will be some, transition issues that will need to be addressed. But I think overall, it's going to be a positive development for society. And eventually that will include elections. But again, I think we're in the process right now of dealing with some of those transition periods, but long term, optimistic.
So would you say we're in a transition period right now with respect to elections as well? I mean, this is, in some of your recent writing at R Street Institute, I think you articulated that this 2024 is really the first election cycle that has AI as a significant presence to where it's being talked about whether or not it's going to play a role at all in the election. Are we still kind of in a transition period, or is AI at a point where it could actually have some degree of impact on the election?
Yeah, the way that I think about AI's role in the election this year is that it really emerged onto the scene essentially with the rollout of ChatGPT, which was not specific to elections, but it certainly applied to the election space. And that really generated an initial reaction of fear, specifically around the ability of AI to disrupt the information ecosystem around elections. So essentially the concerns around deep fake audio, video, and images that, show candidates or election officials doing things that didn't actually happen and that can cause confusion amongst voters. And I think that continues to be the focus area when we're talking about this issue. However, there are some other aspects of elections that AI will be or has already started to impact, where I think there could be some benefits, specifically in the area of election administration and cybersecurity. So, we can get into this more as we go, but, election offices across the country are traditionally understaffed and under-resourced, and AI can be a fantastic productivity tool to help those election officials do their job in a more efficient and effective manner.
I do want to get into some of the specifics, but first, kind of one more general question. Would it be fair to say in your mind that AI presents some really cool opportunities in the space of election policy that we should be attentive to, we should be excited about? But is it also fair to say that we need to make sure we do it right, that however we approach it, it's a new technology, and so there are maybe some safeguards we need to put in place, but overall, should it be viewed positively as this is going to be exciting, it's an opportunity, let's just make sure we put sort of checks in place so that it can be a positive, constructive thing. Is that right? The right way to think about it in your mind?
Yeah, I think particularly when we're talking about its use in election administration, certainly I don't think it would be wise to, have an election office just in a single election cycle hand over a bunch of tasks to AI all at once without really involving the public in, kind of understanding what's going on. I think we need to keep people in the process throughout kind of the rollout of incorporating these tools. And I think that will take time. That'll be over a course of various election cycles instead of all at once. But when it comes to the information environment, I think that one's less about putting government guardrails in place to protect voters from false information and deepfakes and the like. And it's more about people adapting to this new form of communication.
Let's talk about deepfakes for a second. You mentioned it a couple times, and in some of your writing, I think you've also mentioned that some states have even sought to ban through legislation the use of deepfakes. I know that raises some First Amendment questions as well, but can you expand on that a little bit and maybe just give a refresher for our listeners who may not be aware of what a deepfake is? We've seen a couple of them kind of arrive on scene online this election cycle. So what is it? How are some states responding? And what's your perspective on the right way to address something like deepfakes?
Sure. So in terms of a refresher on what deepfakes are, they're essentially fake audio, video, or images of people doing something that didn't actually happen, doing or saying things that didn't actually happen. And what makes them a deep fake rather than, just Photoshop manipulating a picture is that artificial intelligence can actually generate these and make them incredibly realistic and potentially believable. So what we've seen, to provide a couple examples, which might be useful to the listeners, back in January, when New Hampshire was about to have their primary election for president, Democratic voters received a robocall from a voice that sounded like President Joe Biden, urging them to sit out the primary election and save their vote for the general. So this was clearly not something that was true, right? You can vote in both the primary and the general. There's no need to save the vote. And it was a good example of a voice that purported to be the president, urging people to kind of not participate in an election. So that was one high profile example, which it did eventually lead to some penalties against the individual who created and distributed that example of a deepfake. And then there's been some other ones that are a little less consequential, I would say. One from a few months ago was in an image showing Taylor Swift fans expressing their support and endorsement of President Trump. It wasn't real, but he, responded to it and essentially said, "I accept the endorsement." And it was just something that flew around the internet. I don't think that necessarily is going to impact the outcome in any meaningful way, but it's, that type of deceptive content that can be used for more nefarious purposes, as opposed to more, fun stuff like memes, essentially.
I guess a key question of that is what's the right response societally? And I guess I would frame it as, in those instances you mentioned, from what I recall from watching this unfold online, when something like that was posted, it was very, very quick that the relevant campaign would say, nope, that's not us, that's not our candidate, this is false, this isn't real. And so I guess the question is, do we need government regulation, or is sort of the private sector response, either from campaigns or candidates or even from tech companies, is kind of the private groundswell, the non-governmental sector saying, no, this is fake and this is real. Is that sufficient? Do we even need any kind of government regulation for something like this?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I guess I didn't really get to that part of the question before this. So, yeah, the government response to the problem of deepfakes has primarily manifested, particularly at the state level, in new laws that require disclosure or labeling of the fact that any given image that is manipulated has been manipulated through AI. So there's kind of been a break in the response between states that go down that path of requiring labeling and additional transparency. And then a few others have tried to take the more heavy-handed approach of prohibiting the use of AI in deceptive election content. And as you mentioned, that approach in particular has already resulted in some legal challenges and free speech concerns around whether those are actually constitutional or enforceable. So when it comes to the labeling, my view on it is it's fairly harmless from a speech burden perspective, right? If you just require a disclosure that something was generated with AI, it's something that we're already kind of familiar with in the context of campaign finance, right? Campaigns have to often disclose, I approve this message from the candidate, or funded by, those type of things. But then the question is that really going to be effective in informing the public about the potential risk, right? Because there could be an incentive to over-label stuff that might not actually be meaningfully generated by AI, but just as a cover from being accused of not labeling it, you might end up with everything with the label slapped on it, and then it kind of becomes meaningless. So I think those are some of the kind of balancing acts that lawmakers are trying to pull off when it comes to regulating. And then another, 30 states or so just chose to do nothing and wait and see how things play out, essentially.
Chris, if you were talking to leadership at the state level, either here in Utah or other states, I usually kind of do my elevator question at the end of an episode, but I think it makes sense to do it now. If you find yourself in an elevator with Utah's governor and legislative leadership, or the president and congressional leadership, or leadership from another state, and they say, hey, we've got 20 seconds. You're Chris McIsaac. What should we do on AI? Should we pass a law? If so, what should it be? What's your gut to tell them?
Yeah, my gut reaction is to not pass a law. I think I would look at this as another iteration of the way that we communicate evolving, and now there's going to be artificial intelligence enhanced communications that people are going to see regularly in their daily lives online, and over time people are going to adapt. So I don't think the government needs to step in and try to prevent that from happening, certainly. And even on the labeling, I don't think it's necessary. So I would urge them to not pursue a legislative solution at this time.
Would it be safe to say that, especially as you mentioned earlier, there's a transition process? That, again, this is a new technology. This is really the first election cycle where this has even been a factor at all. Would you say that, well, we shouldn't rush to regulate? That's an instinct that sometimes comes about whenever there are new questions posed on important topics like this, but sort of the instinct that some in government might have to say, well, we got to hurry and regulate this new thing that we don't fully understand the implications of yet. Is it fair to say that you're essentially saying, no, just hold your horses, don't do that yet. Let's maybe just see how this plays out a little bit, be aware of the opportunities and maybe risks, but we're not at the stage yet where there's sort of this this mass momentum to say that we need to have government regulation. Is that a fair interpretation of what you're saying?
Yeah, I think the resisting the urge to try to solve this with a new law is the right one. But I think there is a role that government can play in terms of their responsibility to administer elections. And I think that they have, an opportunity to communicate more proactively with the public about establishing themselves as a trusted source of election process information. So I think the distinction between, deep fakes and misinformation related to candidates versus the election process and procedures is important. I think the candidates and the campaigns, it's up to them to counter or dispute, the fake information about, their candidates. But I think, local election officials and secretaries of state, lieutenant governors, they do have, I would say, an opportunity and a responsibility to help educate the public on here is how our elections work. Here's, where to vote, when to vote, and really build that credibility so that when the public comes across these deceptive deep fakes that are trying to cause chaos and confusion, they'll know, oh, let's go check with my local election office to see like what's actually the deal, as opposed to just accepting at face value some of the stuff that they hear online from a deep fake or any other form of misinformation. I think that's another important point is the AI is just a tool that people can use to spread the lie that, they can still spread the old fashioned way. So it's an accelerant, not necessarily a brand new issue that is confronting us at this point.
It's interesting you bring in kind of the question of where should I go to find trustworthy information about the election. And in a recent episode, we actually just had on the lieutenant governor of Utah and a couple of county clerks talking about election processes and some of the security measures Utah has in place. And a big theme from that conversation, and a big theme in the context of election trust in general, is this reminder for folks of where you can go. What are the trustworthy sources of information? And as you mentioned, your local county clerk's office, the state elections office here in Utah, it's vote.utah.gov. Very easy to remember URL to point people towards. So I'd love any kind of final thoughts before we go to a quick break about what's the right way, I guess, for, in this case, local county clerks, local election administrators at the state and local level to view their role with respect to AI. Is it that obviously there are the mailers that go out and the links that go out to say, here's kind of where you can go to get information about the candidates who are appearing on your ballot? Do we just need to beef up that to make clear that this is where you get good, accurate information about your ballot and who's on it? Any thoughts there? Maybe even policy ideas or recommendations for the actual election administrators to make sure that as a source of trustworthy election content remains so throughout this advent of artificial intelligence?
Yeah, I think it's certainly the things that you just mentioned. Plus, I think it's important for election officials to have a presence online, whether it's, through a Facebook account or X or wherever these conversations are happening, and where the false information might be coming from. I think they should be engaging there. And, the Maricopa County's current elections director, or I forget the exact title that he holds, but he's the elected election director of Maricopa County. He's very active online in trying to, explain the process in the venue, right, where these conversations are happening. So I think that's valuable and could be something that other offices could learn from. There's been at the national level, I believe it's the Secretaries of State Association. They've had a big initiative to kind of push out through their membership those type of messages to, just establish themselves as, we're the credible source for information related to the process. Check with, the locals, the secretaries of state, et cetera. So I think just as many different ways that people can think of to communicate with the public and be engaged in the conversation will be helpful. And it might take a few rounds of elections to kind of build that skill, because it's obviously something that they haven't had to do quite as aggressively in the past. But I think it's a worthwhile investment for them to take some steps in that regard.
Well, Chris, let's take a quick break for our listeners, but when we come back, I want to get into some of the additional specifics. You mentioned, we talked a little bit already about deep fakes, but there are some other kind of more specific applications of this in terms of election administration that might actually present some really cool opportunities that can make things more efficient or trustworthy. So I want to dive into some of those specifics right after the break. Again, folks, we're talking with Chris McIsaac from the R Street Institute about artificial intelligence in elections. This is Defending Ideas. Stick around. We'll be right back after this.
For a deeper dive into the issues you care about, read Sutherland Institute's official blog, Insights and Takeaways. You'll gain deep insights from policy experts and relevant takeaways voters need to know. Visit sutherlandinstitute.org.
Welcome back to Defending Ideas. I'm Nic Dunn, and we're talking with Chris McIsaac from the R Street Institute. He's a resident fellow in governance. We're going to continue the conversation about artificial intelligence in election policy. But first, I want to remind you, if you like what you're hearing today, please visit defendingideas.org. You can find this and previous conversations, and also get access to short clips from all of our episodes that you can share on your social platforms. You can access all of that at defendingideas.org and our YouTube channel, where you can watch these episodes. And if you like to watch on YouTube, please click the little bell icon in the corner so you get notified each time a new episode publishes, which is every Tuesday morning. You can also subscribe to Defending Ideas on any of the major podcast platforms like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you like to get your shows. Just search for Defending Ideas and click that subscribe button. Chris, I want to continue where we left off and maybe touch on a few of the specifics. You wrote in August of this year in an article for R Street Institute about this topic, and I want to read an excerpt of it and then ask you to expand on it, because you're talking about this in the context of election administration and say that there actually might be some gains that we could realize by appropriately using AI in how we administer elections to make things more efficient or more accurate. And here's what you say. You write, AI holds great promise as a productivity tool for the more than 10,000 local election jurisdictions across the country. It can be used to streamline administrative tasks like proofreading ballots before they're printed, assist with fulfilling public records requests, and eventually help with more complex tasks like verifying voter signatures or analyzing stray marks on hand-marked paper ballots. Chris, I want to ask you to expand on that a little bit and to use a recent hook. There was some discussion here in Utah about the signature verification process in the primary, where a legislative audit report looked at that and talked about some of the error rates. Again, all the candidates qualified; they met all the requirements that were given to them to qualify for the ballot. But there is now this conversation of, well, how do we improve this process moving forward? So what you wrote kind of stood out to me of, well, if AI can help with signature verification, let's expand on that a little bit. What would you articulate as, in those kinds of things, where should we be looking to potentially leverage AI in a positive way?
Yeah, so these are a number of areas where there's great opportunity. I think some more near term and others more long term in terms of implementation. So starting with the signature verification piece, one of the things generally that artificial intelligence is just good at doing is comparing, data sets against each other. And that's essentially what you're doing with signatures, right? You're comparing the signature on either the ballot envelope or the petition against a signature on file somewhere else. So I think, having AI assist in flagging those signatures that might need additional human review could just be a great efficiency tool in that pretty cumbersome process when you're doing it by hand. But the key on that one and all of them is that AI is not making the decision on whether the signature is valid or not. It's elevating it for further review from a human. So I think that's really important as you roll out any of these efficiency tools, is to make clear to the public and, certainly for the workers that, this is something that's going to assist in, fulfilling these various tasks. An efficiency tool, not a decision maker. So yeah, I'll stop there, but I can talk about the other ones as well.
Well, I was just going to follow up on that for a minute, because I think that's an important principle, is that would you view the application of AI in election policy as AI is not a tool that replaces or supplants, human judgment, but it can supplement in some way to get some efficiency gains or some accuracy gains? Is that the right way to think about it? And if so, how do we make sure that's how it would actually be applied if it rolls forward?
Yeah, that is the right way to think about it, that it's an efficiency tool that can help election workers do their jobs better. And I think an important thing to remember on the election administration front is that, as I mentioned earlier, there's over 10,000 election jurisdictions across the country. So this is an incredibly decentralized structure, which is a good thing overall, because it keeps elections close to the people. It prevents a problem in any one jurisdiction from tainting the results of the election writ large. It isolates problems. So that's all good. But what you get in exchange is a little bit of inefficiency, right? You have 10,000 different entities dealing with elections. There's bound to be inefficiencies, and for a lot of offices, a lack of staff and money to do some of the important work that they're doing. So I think especially for those smaller jurisdictions where they might only have a couple employees, I think these could really, AI could really be a tool that can help them deliver better service to their constituents by, doing all of the important work that they're doing more efficiently.
I was going to say that the efficiency piece stands out to me, because one of the questions that's come up recently about, election results and wanting to make sure that people have trust and confidence in election results. But the question has come up of, well, why can't we know sometimes who won on election night, or at the very least the next day? And here in Utah, where we're a predominantly vote by mail system, obviously it takes time to count ballots, to verify signatures. So whether in that context or anything else, I wonder are there other efficiency gains that, again, it can still be within the proper constraints and leveraging human judgment and decision making, but to gain some efficiency. Basically, the basic question is, can we use AI to speed things up while maintaining or improving accuracy so that we get results faster? Is that something that you see as a potential area for the application of this?
I think over time, it could certainly help in that regard. There's going to be some aspects of state and local election laws and procedures that faster AI-assisted counting isn't necessarily going to be able to overcome, but it could help. So I'm thinking specifically in the state where I live, Arizona. One of the challenges that state faces in getting results out quickly is the fact that you can essentially deliver your paper ballot to the polls like on election day, essentially. So there's this big influx of ballots that need to be opened, processed as a mail ballot, even though it's kind of hitting the election drop box the day of the election. So in any case, AI is not going to be able to help deal with that issue, but it will be able to potentially, using signature verification as an example, it could help with kind of facilitating that process a little bit quicker. However, I think talking more broadly about, trust in the process, I think another area where AI could be helpful is in the area of public records requests. There's been a pretty big uptick of that in terms of requests coming into election offices. Many times the small offices that have limited staff. And that's a very time consuming process to figure out, how to handle the request, what to pull, the redactions that need to happen if necessary, all of those, personally identifiable information, getting that out of whatever's released. So I think that's another place where AI could be a useful efficiency tool. It's actually an area that the federal government, a few agencies are already experimenting with to deal with, the extensive volume of public records requests that they receive. So I think if you can get the information that the public is requesting out to them quicker, or at least respond to them and acknowledge their request quicker, I think that could all contribute to helping improve, trust in the process over time.
One of the big things that we've talked about a lot recently here on this podcast and at Sutherland in general on the issue of election trust is the voter experience. And, when they go to vote, either in the primary process or in the general election process, or some of the things you're mentioning, if they're submitting public records requests or other informational requests to local officials, there is this important element of the voter experience, how you experience your interaction with your local election officials or with the ballot or with the process of voting has an impact. If it's a good experience, that can help foster and strengthen trust and confidence. If it's a bad experience, it could go the other way. And so I'm curious to any general thoughts you have as far as, because we've talked a lot about kind of the election administration side, which I think there's a lot of validity to those potential ideas moving forward. But as far as the voter experience, is there anything you see where AI should be viewed as an asset or maybe could be leveraged in some way, either building off of what you've said or anything else that comes to mind? In other words, how can I as a voter expect to hopefully see AI in some way improve my voting experience in whatever stage of the process where it might have some merit? Any thoughts there about how we should approach that or maybe some opportunities there?
I think there's still potential for AI to be helpful as a communication tool between voters and election offices. We talked about that earlier in terms of building trust and establishing themselves as a trusted source of information. I don't think it's quite there yet, but eventually the idea of a trustworthy chatbot from the local election office would certainly help them be more responsive to more voters more quickly. I don't think we're quite there yet. And particularly, I don't think the public has trust in those to, be the only thing they should rely on. But I think over time, whether it's a chatbot or automated audio type communications over the phone, I think all of that can only be helpful to, make voters feel more connected to their the election process and the folks who are operating it.
That's actually, I'm glad you said that. That's actually something that was popping into my mind as you started to answer the question, because I've even seen now just most internet browsers, when you plug in your initial question of whatever your question is, often, I don't know if this is all browsers, but I've been seeing now the very first thing that pops up is an AI generated answer with some bullet points answering a question, directing you to some links. Then you scroll down and you get your traditional search engine answers. But that thought of if it's something that's created by or leveraged by the local election official or the state election office in some way so that they can essentially maintain accuracy in the information, I could see that actually being really cool, that a chat bot that you can either talk to via text or now with the progression of AI, even talk to verbally. I've started to see more and more of those things come on the scene. I'm thinking specifically, Chris, if somebody has questions about the process, about election security, if they can talk to a trusted election official chatbot and say, help me understand how I know my ballot is secure when I mail it in. Help me understand, why a voting machine can't be hacked, I mean, those kinds of things that it's just a Q&A, but creates more of a real interaction with the voter and the local elected official. That actually seems really exciting to me. Has anyone started to even try that or look at that? Are there any jurisdictions anywhere in the country that you would view as kind of ahead of the curve or at least moving in the right direction on this stuff?
That's a good question. I don't, off the top of my head, have examples of places that are doing this. I think there are a couple, but it slips my mind what those were. But I think, like I said earlier, I don't think we're quite there yet. I think the term election chatbot has been a little bit. The public doesn't trust them, essentially. I think because when you have seen some early examples of asking just, I think, ChatGPT or some other like generic non-election expert chatbots about elections, they don't get it right a lot of the time. But I think what we're talking about is more of a tailored election official or election office focused bot that would, be reliable. I think that's where the opportunity is. But right now, if you just ask, the random chatbot that might be built into something else, an election question, it's probably not the place to be turning to for that information quite yet. But like I said, I think as we get past this immediate election in front of us, and election officials can breathe a little bit, I think you'll see some focused attention on how to do that well moving forward.
Well, I think that makes sense given the fact that, again, as we said at the beginning, this is a new and emerging technology, and it's moving incredibly fast. I mean, that's kind of the nature of free enterprise-based innovation. It's exciting. There, again, are still some things we want to make sure are done in the right way, as we've talked about today. I guess final question for you, kind of building off that point that you just made. We're about to have an election, and post-election, there will likely be conversations about reforms to improve the election process for the next time. So I guess the question for you, Chris, as we wrap up is, what are the kinds of things that we, either voters or policymakers or election officials, should be watching for during this election cycle that can help inform how we approach AI in elections in the future, that might provide some good foundation for either policy reforms or other interventions, so in the intervening months and years, so that the next election cycle, we're a little bit further along with being able to harness this as a helpful tool in some of the ways we articulated. What should policymakers be looking for from this election cycle to help inform our policy and societal conversations about AI in elections, post-election and moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I'm going to be certainly focused on, and I think policymakers should be as well, is to do a little bit of a after-action look back on how some of the AI election legislation that has been passed over the past year, how it was implemented, and if there were, any examples of, really disruptive deepfakes happening, and the extent to which, there was a difference between states that maybe had a law in the books versus those that chose to wait. And then, to the extent that there is enforcement that happens around people who violate those disclosure laws in states that have them, just kind of seeing how all of that plays out over the next few weeks. I think that'll be important for informing the, appropriate response during the 2025 session. And then, on the administrative side, I think one thing that people should be cognizant of is, the idea of the deceptive AI-generated deepfakes not ending at election day, in the sense of, the candidates are going to be fighting for votes right up until the end, but the opportunity to potentially sow some doubt in the process post-election in terms of counting votes or recounts or certification. I think that would be another area that the public should remain on guard against as they're consuming information online. There's probably going to be a lot of false information flying around in the weeks following the election. So I think that's another area that people should kind of keep their guard up as they're engaging in, online communications and the rest of it heading into the post-election period.
Oh, it's probably a good reminder of that theme of where to go for accurate and trustworthy election information. But just to build on that it's post-election day, remember to keep going to the correct sources. And again, here in Utah, vote.utah.gov is a great place to go. Local county clerk's offices are a great place to go. And so again, just sort of extending that in the days or weeks or months after the election, we should remember, again, where are the best, accurate, authoritative sources on election information and sort of maintain that vigilance moving forward. I think that's a very helpful reminder.
Great. Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see what happens, but I think, keep checking with those local officials if you have questions about process related issues.
Well, Chris, I really appreciate your time. I think that'll cover it for this conversation. We'll, of course, eagerly watch what happens in the coming days and weeks with this election cycle, and then maybe afterwards we'll compare notes and see, okay, what does this mean for the AI and elections policy conversation moving forward, and just kind of continue to watch this new and emerging technology that, again, I think is very exciting. Also presents some questions we need to make sure that are answered so it is leveraged appropriately and in a way that's constructive. But I just really appreciate you kind of keeping an eye on this issue and the work you do at R Street Institute, and also lending some of your time and expertise with us here on Defending Ideas. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, I enjoyed it, and really appreciate the opportunity, and happy to do it again anytime.
Well, we will take one more quick break before we leave you with some final talking points. Again, that was Chris McIsaac, Resident Fellow in Governance at R Street Institute, talking to us about AI and elections. Thanks again, Chris, and folks, stick around. One more quick break. This is Defending Ideas. We'll be right back.
Sometimes it's hard to keep up with the latest policy debate that affects your life. The solution? Subscribe to Sutherland Institute's weekly newsletter, where you'll find in-depth insights from seasoned policy experts, compelling multimedia, and advance notice of special events. Visit sutherlandinstitute.org.
Welcome back to Defending Ideas. Before we go, there are a few key takeaways from this conversation that are important for you and I to remember. Number one, the best place to go for election information is still authoritative, trustworthy sources like the state elections website or your local county clerk's office. If you're worried at all about AI and its impact on elections, staying connected to the state and local officials who are constitutionally charged with administering fair and secure elections is important. As with any new technology, there can be questions, but we should also view it with optimism that the innovation of our free enterprise system will find ways to make things better, in this case, to improve the administration of elections and enhance the voter experience. It's still early in regard to the recent advent of AI, so watch how it unfolds in the coming weeks, months, and years. That's it for this episode of Defending Ideas. If you enjoyed this discussion, please visit defendingideas.org, where you can access previous episodes and watch or listen on your favorite platform. Don't forget to subscribe to Defending Ideas on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you like to get your shows. And please share this episode on your own social media profiles or with a friend, family member, or coworker who you think might find it interesting. And lastly, if you want to support the broad work of Sutherland Institute, if you want more conversations like this, please make a contribution at sutherlandinstitute.org/donate. Thanks again for joining us on Defending Ideas. From the Sutherland Institute in Salt Lake City, I'm Nic Dunn. We'll see you next time.